Welcome back to A Lifetime of Mafia Tales. Today, Sal and I discussed Lucchese crime family underboss Anthony Gaspipe Casso. There was so much information about him, so this is part 3. We already did a part 1 and part 2, so if you want to find those videos, they're in the video description below. During Anthony's early career in the mob, he became a made man in the Lucchese family, and he was sent to the 19th Hole crew. This crew was also very known for forming the Bypass Gang. The reason they were called this was because they would find banks with valuable safes and break a hole into the cellar walls, then go in and get the vault, and then after that they would steal everything. The Bypass Gang is rumored of committing burglaries in banks and jewelry stores throughout New York. Anthony had a book about his life named Confessions of a Mafia Boss. This is where we're basing our information off today. Also, we did some reading online. You decide whether it's true or not. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel for more videos like this. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon channel for an exclusive story about Anthony Casso and the next Mafia hitman turned informant. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, welcome back everyone to episode 3 of Anthony Gaspipe Casso. How you feeling today, Sal?
All right.
Good,
okay.
man.
Got a little cough, but I'm okay.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to have a good episode here today. In particular, we're going to be focusing on Anthony Casso and the Bypass Gang and how he got to that point. And ultimately how he brought that whole crew that he was with down when he became an informant. So, I mean, basically, from what I researched from that book again that we had read was the Confessions of a Mafia Boss, and that's where we got a lot of the information from. Was that he joined a crew named the 19th Hole Crew, and that was after he became a made man when he was 32 years old. And they sent him over to a crew, and it was on 14th Ave in Brooklyn. And shortly after, he became just this. He met this upcoming mobster, of course, Musso, and they formed a criminal relationship for over two decades. And then eventually, they would both go on to joining another crew that was ran by that Chrissy Tick that we had talked about.
Right.
And that crew was, I guess, the 19th Hole Crew.
The 19th Hole was the favorite nightclub.
Okay, so that's
what it was.
Yeah, that's where they were operating out of then, you think?
Yeah. Everybody knew it was a mob location.
Damn.
I mean, I passed there with Cataldo a few times.
Did he ever mention anything about them guys?
I think once in a while he'd mention that he was involved with this great bunch of burglars, that would they were capable of shutting off alarm systems, because the two big alarm companies in those days was Holmes Detective Agency, and ADT. And, they made connections with somebody in those companies. Like, I also did a burglary once on Park Avenue with a couple of guys where they shut the alarm off. We went in there and we managed to get in the apartment. It was an exotic penthouse, and we got a whole bunch of jewelry. Cataldo was involved in that, so he was experienced in shutting off alarms.
Well, he was also involved. You said you had some inside information that he had given you, is that he was doing crimes with this Bypass Gang that Anthony Casso was a part of, and a lot of other different guys. So, to you, I guess I can give the version that I researched, and you can tell me if this is kind of accurate from what you've heard about the Bypass Gang. But it was formed within Chrissy Tick's crew, the 19th Hole Crew. This Bypass Gang, and Anthony and Musso, they led the whole burglary ring, and this included, they had all kinds of people that were able to be good at locksmithing, safe crackers, and experts in, as you said, the safety alarm system. So the Bypass Gang is rumored of committing burglaries in banks and jewelry stores throughout New York. The feds estimated that the Bypass Gang stole more than $100 million worth of jewelry, money, safety deposit box, and all those vaults during 1970s to 1980s. And the whole Bypass Gang, what they would do is they would find vulnerable safes and break a hole into the cellular walls, and then they'd go into the vault and they'd steal everything and put it in their black van. And
Right.
a little fun fact too that I was telling Sal about was that inside this black van they had food, drinks, a bathroom, and so they wouldn't
Right.
have to leave. They wouldn't have to go outside their van while they were parked out there, scoping it out and
Right.
stuff. But yeah, I mean, how does that sound to you? I mean, does that
Yeah, that was
sound
pretty accurate because Cataldo talked a little bit about it, and he said that the feds would investigate these burglaries, but they were rarely ever mentioned in the news. They would keep it very quiet because the banks didn't want that information to get out.
how
There's
come?
a lot of scams and robberies that the banks wanted to keep it secret because they would lose their customers.
They
Like a
wouldn't feel
guy I knew,
safe?
yeah, like a guy I knew in the '60s managed to figure out how to rip off the early ATMs, and they never publicized that stuff. So
Because
yeah,
is it because they felt like people would start doing it more?
no, they felt that their customers would leave the bank.
Just because
It,
yeah, safety of their money.
yeah, oh yeah, they knew they couldn't stop it because it was happening, but it was very, very hush hush.
Well, with the inside information that you have with Cataldo and the bypass gang, what was it about? Because I mean, he told you a little bit about what the bypass gang was and being a part of it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
can you expand on that?
yeah. They would have, they had connections in those alarm companies, so they could shut the alarms off. And what they did was they actually went and had somebody buy the complete alarm system, and they took it home and they played with it, and they learned how to dismantle it, and they learned how to effectively shut the alarm system off, from the location. And then they had to have, there was what they call a random line signals. In the beginning, it was like one signal, like say a long beep, beep or something. Well, once these guys started hitting all these banks, the alarm companies started to install systems that had random beeps, so they would know if somebody broke into their alarm system. Cataldo talked about it, how clever their crew was. He didn't mention Casso, but he did mention that he was involved with some sophisticated burglars.
And now you also read recently on that book that he was on that page 107 of the
Right,
Deal with the Devil, and
right,
it was said that Cataldo and Casso they were working together, and you
right.
recently read that, so you kind of put two and two together. Is that what you
Yeah,
were thinking, or I mean, what
yeah.
did you think?
Cataldo was pretty hush hush about that. I believe that was the early '70s. How long they did it, I don't know, but they made a bunch of money, and I think there was that Donnie Shocks was involved with that too.
Hmm. And he
That's the
was
guy I met with Dominick.
with the Columbos too.
Right, Donnie Shocks. He wound up in L.A.
Yeah. Well, maybe they hadn't. They from what I read, like I said, I mean, it was mainly this 19th hole crew that was maybe the leadership, the founders of it, and maybe, like you
Right.
said, they involved Cataldo in it, and then they've
Yeah.
involved Donnie Shacks in there. So maybe they were pretty open to sharing it with some of the other families that were
Right.
around in the other five families in New York. But with the leadership of this crew, this whole 19th hole crew, I've researched, and it was that Chrissy Tick, he was the original capo while when Casso and Vicamuso joined, but then he eventually got promoted to being the Lucchese family's consigliere. So he asked Anthony to take over this crew, but again, remember how we stated in the other episodes was that he didn't want that leadership status of being the
Right.
boss when he was even offering to be the boss. But this is just being a capo way back when he
Yeah.
first started. But he said same thing. He just said no, you should have Vic do it.
Yeah.
Vic's good for the position, and he you should have him. So that's what happened. They ended up doing that for a little while, and then I I, I believe that in 1986, that's when Vic Musso did go on to becoming the boss. So then
Okay.
that's when Casso did take over the crew and become a capo.
So if they were doing it in the '70s and they got into the '80s, I'm sure the alarm companies came up with new technology where they couldn't bypass the alarms after a while.
Yeah,
Okay. So
probably.
then they may have backed off and did other locations, not like banks, because a bank took days to get down in the vault area. They had to go to a business right adjacent to the bank and dig down. I mean, it was a long drawn out, affair to break into the vault of a bank that was down in the basement.
That's true. I mean, it's going to take a lot of work to really.
Yeah.
I mean, you see what they did. They went and they would stay in a van, and then once the weekend came around, I suppose they come out and figure out how they're going to get in there, get down, and but I mean that was their job, just like you said. When you're on the street, just trying to
Yeah.
every day
Yeah.
was another hustle, another scam.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
this was it, and I was going to bring up too another point when they said Anthony took over the crew and became capo. It was so some of the information as well that I got was from the book, and then some was online, and it was said that under Anthony's reign, this whole this crew would be responsible for over 100 murders, making it the most violent and most
Wow.
bloodiest reign in the Lucchese crime family.
It's
So I mean,
amazing. They were killing people as fast as they were doing burglaries. I mean, if they found, don't forget, Casso had, cops and maybe FBI agents on the payroll, and he could find out who flipped and who was given, information as an informant. And that was what, Cataldo worked on too. He was always looking, excuse me, for a connection that would
well,
give him information about who was flipping.
well, that leads into what I was going to say next is that when they Anthony and Vic were coming up, again, this was reported on the internet, was that they were drug trafficking, doing burglaries and murders of informants in their early
Right.
years. So
Right.
I mean, what you're saying is pretty much lines up with what I found online. So, I mean, that
Yeah.
just goes to show that these guys had, really bloody rain is what they called that.
Did anybody flip and give the detailed information on how those bank burglaries took place? Because I didn't see that.
No, I didn't either. There's not a whole lot,
Right.
like you said, because when I was trying to do research, I'm like, where's there's not much articles or anything. There's Casso statements, of course, that are out there.
Yeah.
They said that this bypass gang, they were responsible for robbing over $100 million worth of money, cash, et
Yeah.
cetera, jewelry, everything like
Amazing.
that.
That's
But
amazing. Yeah.
all other than that, I mean, it's just really Casso statements, and then your book that you just recently. Then I guess your inside information with Cataldo, he told you about it, and then of
Yeah.
course you seen it on that book. So I mean, it had to have existed. I mean, if someone in the life told you that in
Yeah.
what the 70s when
Yeah. I
Cataldo
think
told
it
you that.
was the 70s. It was early on before I went to jail, maybe. I'm not sure how long that lasted. But, the amount of violence that Casso was involved in and the people that he was killing, I mean, continued to the 80s, right? Right into the 80s.
Yeah, and I mean that's when he I guess he transferred. I mean, when he got out of this crew was in, I think, 86 to 87. He was promoted to the consigliere, and
Yep.
then he became the underboss
That
after
was
that.
after the Castellano hit, because that
Yeah,
was December of 85. But what I was thinking is those two mafia cops, when did he start working those two guys to give him information? And they were also involved with the federal task force beside NYPD. They were working with the feds and they were passing information on, to Casso.
yeah. I mean, that's just insane, man. It goes to show that he was able to get this information maybe through just because remember he got the information from a Jewish gangster, Burt Kaplan, on the Mafia cops. That's how he made a connection
Right.
with them.
Right. But
I
that
mean,
was like early 80s, right?
I think so when all that was going down
Yeah.
because they ended up getting convicted later on, way later,
Yeah.
after being after doing that. The Mafia cops after they were doing the hits for the Lucchese family on
Yeah.
Anthony's orders, but
People have to realize once these guys start committing murders, they have to continue committing more murders to cover up the previous crimes.
It
I
just
mean,
never ends.
yeah, it's just it just rolls over. They're killing people left and right, and they're getting away with it because he had law enforcement on the take, and he could find out what was going on, who was investigating what. I mean, those two mafia cops, they probably were shocked when he flipped, whatever year that was that he flipped. I don't remember exactly what year that was, but they gave
I
the
think
mafia cops.
93.
What was it?
93, I think.
Oh yeah, he had a long run then. Casso had a long run through the '80s. Wow, you
Yeah,
know.
that's what I'm saying, man. Because
Yeah,
the other information that I have, when he became an informant, he
yeah.
really brought down this crew. So what it says is that in 1993, Anthony was arrested and became the highest-ranking member of the mafia to turn informant.
Yeah.
After Anthony did this, a lot of the crew's leadership was in prison, and eventually the crew was merged with Polivario's crew, creating a Brooklyn faction. The Brooklyn faction was created after two separate crews and the Lucchese family were merged together. The
Wow.
merge occurred during the 2000s when the Lucchese family decided that Polivario capo regime, well, the capo of Polivario's crew, it looks like his name was Danny Catati, and
I
he would
didn't know.
also. Well, yeah, I mean, he was in the 2000s, I think, when they merged this. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was also take control of the 19th Ave crew. So then
Yeah.
the Lucchese family saw the 19th Ave crew without leadership because it had been crippled by numerous indictments and informants during the 1990s, leaving many members of the family in prison. So that was really the downfall of the crew. So I'm sure after Casso flipped, and a lot of the guys went to prison or either cooperated, and so they merged the crews, two of them together.
Yeah. A pretty sick, violent guy, man. If you got information on someone, the guy was dead the next day. Whether or not the bodies showed up, most of the time, they disposed of the bodies. They leave them in the trunk of a car, send the car over to get crushed. I mean, I knew the name of the salvage yard that was crushing cars. The Caniglias had a junkyard, but they didn't crush cars there. They had a guy named Joe from Industrial in Brooklyn, a huge, huge operation. Had big machines where they would drive the car over there, and 15 minutes later, it would be crushed up the size of a cube.
Damn,
So
man.
that's where they crushed all the cars. It was called Industrial because I had a couple of cars that I reported stolen, and they wound over in Brooklyn. And all I knew the guy's name was Joe. If he was the manager, the owner, I don't know, but it was Industrial Salvage.
you
And I
think
think Charles Caniglia was involved in a lot of that.
you think Joe knew what he was crushing?
Oh yeah, yeah. And everybody used that place. If you had the connection between Angelo, the Caniglias, probably, some of the Colombo guys used it. I mean, Casso was deep inside all these mob guys, so they owed him favors, and he was making big money. So it wasn't about money after a while. Crushing a car was a favor. They didn't pay money for it.
Damn, man.
Yeah.
Well, when you had this information from Cataldo, how did you feel when he told you about this bypass gang and what they were
You know,
doing?
I was busy doing my own thing, and I didn't care what he was doing. As long as I was making money doing what I was doing, that's all I cared about. And by 1980, uh, I had three gold stores, and I was buying and selling gold every day, probably a half a million to $1 million a month, and I was melting it down and making money. So, and I found people that were corrupt in the jewelry business, and I didn't even share some of the stories I was involved in, but I
Well,
will,
yeah,
you
we need
know.
to.
Yeah,
I'm sure you got some good ones because I
yeah, we'll talk
haven't heard
about
them all.
yeah some interesting robberies that I created, set up. I
Yeah.
mean, I went as far as to get my own jewelry store robbed, and we'll talk about that one day.
You got your own store, Rob, man. What a
Yeah,
trip.
yeah,
Let's see what I mean. Really, like you said, there's other than all the information that I've given to you. That's what I could find on this
yeah.
whole bypass gang. But I mean, is there any other Casso topics you want to? We should before we're at an 18-minute mark, but we could continue to talk a little bit more about him.
Well, I think he got involved with the chin, and they wanted to kill Gotti, and so actually, I think he wanted to kill Angelo Ruggiero, but he was sick, had cancer. So, and that was like right around after the time that Castellano was executed. And they tried to kill Gotti, but of course, Frankie DeChico, who I knew, and he was a real legitimate tough guy. I was in Lewisburg with DeChico. So they blew him up. And then I think Casso felt, like less because, oh, he could have killed Angelo. He really wanted to kill Angelo and John. So whoever hired Heidel to kill him, it might have been Angelo, it might have been the Gambinos. And
Wow.
some of that stuff, maybe Heidel never directly spoke with Gotti or Angelo. They'd have someone else do it, an intermediate person, like go kill Casso, and we'll give you 50,000 or something. Who knows? But
Oh, now I remember from what I was reading the other day too is that another theory was that the reason that they convinced the Heidel, because since they said he was a low level Gambino associate, they convinced him that they needed to get revenge for the Frank DeChico killing.
right,
And so what they did was that he ended up going to shoot Casso. But then we also hear stories about Angelo Ruggiero telling him that to take him out because Angelo Ruggiero was offended by Casso calling him a rat or an informant for getting busted on those phone taps. So
yeah,
there's a couple of reasons.
he called him a dummy. I mean, he was stupid. He was not 100-watt bulb, Angelo. He was pretty lame when it came to intelligence.
Well, I mean it could have been both reasons though too. I mean
Yeah,
both more reasons for them to want
yeah,
to do that, but either way it didn't end well because once Castle found out, and we discussed that
yeah,
what had happened to Heidel wasn't
yeah.
it was terrible, but
Wow. Yeah,
um,
his mother opened the door, and the two mafia cops were there. And we have a warrant for your son's arrest, and they took him out of the house where his mother was. And years later, the mother spotted those two on the news. It's amazing how that happened. And she went to the authorities, and there's the two men that took my son out of the house. And of course, I guess his body was never found, right?
I don't know, not that I recall. I mean, I haven't
No.
looked a whole lot into the after part of it, but it,
Yeah.
no, probably not because I mean it was like he just disappeared and never came back, kind of thing. But I
Yeah,
mean, she,
they tortured him, and I don't know if they buried him. I mean, they buried somebody in a building and had the mafia cops help bury somebody. Whether or not it was Heidel, I don't know. But I think he did. He admit, Castle, that he killed Heidel.
yeah, I remember on that interview, and did you
Oh
see
yeah,
with the where he was
yeah.
with that Bradley guy? That I mean, 60.
60 minutes. Yeah, he said he didn't torture him, but in the other book that was written about him, he said he tortured him.
And then he even told that Bradley, "Oh, I shot him a couple times." The guy that was interviewing him,
Yeah,
and he's like, "What's a couple times?" And then he's like, maybe 10." And then Bradley's like,
yeah.
"More like 15." And he's
Yeah,
like, "Yeah."
exactly. So
So,
that's how ruthless this guy was. He was pretty ruthless guy.
what is because we did. I mean, if for the people watching, we did a part one, we did a part two, and now we're doing this part three. So if you haven't watched that, those links will be in the video description, and you
Okay.
can really watch about Casso in his early life and his upbringing,
Yeah.
and boy ended up getting him in prison up until he died, and getting not getting his deal with the government because
Right.
there's a whole lot with that. But I mean, for the people watching, and what could we really say about this? Like the lesson to be learned about getting involved with crime, like he
Well,
did.
this guy was the ultimate vicious, treacherous killer. And if you met the guy, you would have to have a little bit of an antenna up to stay away from him because he was killing left and right. I mean, yes, so was guys like Scarpa, Casso, DeMeo. These were all killers. They were like serial killers. They killed people maybe every week. Nobody knows how many murders Roy DeMeo was involved in. many, many murders. So they were all vicious killers. And if you look at all three of them, they all died miserable. Every one of those guys. That's sort of like the message. You kill, you will die miserably. Um, who was it? Who died of cancer? Casso, right?
COVID, yeah, COVID,
Yeah.
and then he had a
Yeah.
bunch of other issues. Yeah,
And DeMeo was killed. They shot him. And then Scarpa, he died a miserable life with AIDS, died miserably, man. So, what you sow is what you reap. That's how I figured it. Maybe that's why I'm here, because I didn't participate in any murders. Came close, but I did not participate in murders.
I think that's a good way to put it because
Yeah.
what the message is really that getting involved with the crime is just such
Yeah.
a dead end because look what all the stuff that these guys went through and on a
Yeah.
daily basis, just the paranoia, the
Yeah.
always having to look over your shoulder, who's going to kill me next, or who's going to be the next problem to take out, or
Right.
to get on that mindset to where you think that that's okay, and it's
No.
not at all because it's
Pretty
just a
sick.
really sick way to live. It
Yeah.
really is,
Very
and
sick. Yeah. So I
yeah,
mean, even I knew Charles Caniglia pretty well, and that was a sick, demented killer. He tortured people. He put them in vats of acid. I mean, that was another sick guy. I think Gotti used him to kill people. They'd get somebody, kidnap them, put them in a car, and then send them over to Charles Caniglia. And he'd put them in a drum of acid. Could you imagine? Really
yeah,
bad.
burn, 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 man. I mean, because
Yeah.
that shit just melts you. And for him
Yeah.
to be messing around with any of that stuff, that's just so sick. To be around acid or to
Yeah.
put, just to be involved in all that, man. It's crazy, but you know what? It all seems to come down to. It's always money, man.
Yeah.
It's
Oh yeah.
always money. That's what
And
all this is
they're
about.
always covering something up.
Yeah,
The
but
mob guys are covering up something. If you're dealing drugs or marijuana or something, you rarely got to cover anything up until you get into a conflict where you have to murder someone. Then you have to cover something up. And then you kill, and then you got to kill again. I mean, it becomes maybe some of those guys, I think they were sickos because they got excited. I think Cataldo was a vicious murderer. He liked the idea that he could take somebody's life. I heard him
yeah,
talk about that once. Really, to take somebody's life, that's like the ultimate power over people. I thought
hmm,
it was sick. I wasn't interested in that. I mean, I wasn't even interested in continuing a drug business because to me it was very boring. What I found exciting was sophisticated crimes, heist, something like a heist, you had to plan it out. And when you went and did it, then you got the money or the jewelry, whatever. And then it was like a rush. It was exciting to do that, especially that you didn't have to hurt anybody. So that was, what moved me was the money and the heist. And it took me years to figure out I wasn't so much interested in the crime. And when I got to Texas and there was no more crime in my life, that's 39 years ago, I looked back and I said, oh my gosh, it was the rush. It was the chase. It was the chase of the crime, getting it done and then moving on. As soon as I pulled off a good heist, I wanted to do another one. I didn't care about the money.
well, would you say with these guys, their chase was
To
sometimes
kill.
taking out
Yeah,
people?
they got excited over killing. Yeah.
Because I mean, you talked about Cataldo saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. He took a guy upstate New York and had another guy help him kill this guy, and they stuck him down in this grave. Then he told the guy who was with him, the second guy, hey, go down and get his jewelry. And he killed that guy while he was in the grave.
Really?
Yeah, he was a sick, demented guy. You wouldn't know it by talking to him because he had a good personality. People liked him, but he was a vicious killer who um, I think that he was excited about killing people because he talked about it once in a while. Like the guy he killed way back in '69 who tried to rip his brother off. He got to show him, listen, I'm the guy that I'm going to kill you. And he killed him, and got away with it. Back then, that was 1969. They found the guy in some abandoned building in Brooklyn somewhere.
I never heard those ones before. Damn, no,
Yeah.
we haven't
Yeah.
really expanded those ones on Cataldo, but wow,
Yeah.
That just goes to show. I mean, he was definitely a
Yeah.
hitman for that family, and
Oh yeah.
just had his.
Don't know how many hits he did. Who knows? He was
He would,
very quiet about it because he knew there was no statute of limitations on murder. And
yeah.
the guy Jackie Donnelly, he was even more quiet because he was Irish. So they were partners and they were cold blooded, man. Cold blooded killers.
Well, to wrap up now, we're gonna go over to Patreon and we're gonna talk about our plans for who we're gonna cover next. And
Okay.
we'll tell you guys here too is that we plan on covering Greg Scarpa. We're going to start covering him, but we'll go on to Patreon in depth. But we've covered Casso. We've done 3 parts on him, so now we're going to go over and discuss what details we're going to do on Patreon with covering the whole Scarpa family. And so there might be 4 parts to that. Really,
Yeah.
it might be the whole month of February, but we're going to get it out there. And if anybody has any questions or comments or anything, leave them below, and me and Sal will get to them. But if you want to hear more stories, go and subscribe to our Patreon, because we're going to go over there and discuss. But Sal, any final words?
It's just that we're dealing with people that were really vicious and cold-hearted, and I really didn't associate with those type of guys. Yeah, I ran into them and all, but I wasn't interested in socializing with these sickos.
Yeah, well, everyone, we'll see on the next one. Anthony Casso has got one terrible story. Now that you have heard his full story about him, please let us know your thoughts in the comments. Again, this just goes to show that the criminal life is a dead end. Anthony Casso tried to become an informant, and it still didn't work out for him. He ended up spending the rest of his life in prison. Part 1 and Part 2 are in the video description below, so if you haven't watched them yet, please check those out. I know you'll enjoy them if you enjoyed today's video. Please share this video around with all your friends that will enjoy this type of content. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. And furthermore, please subscribe to our Patreon channel for more exclusive stories about Anthony Gaspipe Casso and the next man that we're going to be covering, Greg Scarpa. Greg was a Colombo capo, and he was an informant for 3 decades. The last thing that I'll bring up is if you enjoy all my shows that I've been doing with Sal, I know you'll enjoy my other podcast called the Invest in Yourself podcast. On that podcast, I cover all kinds of great redemption stories with ex-gangsters, mobsters, criminals, former addicts, and just on and on. The list really goes on and on. The way you can access that podcast is by clicking on this same YouTube channel and going to the playlist tab and clicking on the Invest in Yourself podcast. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one. If you would like to support our podcast, we got a few items that you can purchase. All of these items can be found in the video description below. The first one is Sal's book, The Sinatra Club. You can get this personally autographed by Sal. The next one in our hottest seller is the 1972 Sinatra Club playing cards. Back in Sal's Mafia days, he opened up his own social club named the Sinatra Club. Many mobsters would come to this club, even when there were all-out wars going on between different families. They would come to the Sinatra Club and play cards. Some of the mobsters that played with these cards were John Gotti, Dominick Cataldo, Tommy DeSimone, Foxy, Jimmy Burke, Willie Boy Johnson, Tony Roach, Henry Hill, Joe DeFede, Danny Fatico, Gene Gotti, Peter Gotti, Joey Scopo, and many more. We're selling each one of these cards for $10 a piece. These cards are limited, we only got 1,000 of them. The next item is an autographed picture of Sal from his Mafia days. Another item is the Dinner with the Mobster card. You can get this autographed as well. This was an event that Sal had hosted in the past. We also got the Ubats production ticket from an event that Sal had hosted. This is also autographed. The last item we got to offer is Sal's book, The Sins of the Father. Again, you can find all these items in the video description below.